And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch.
Yeah, that was his best moment, and it was a clear statement to Putin to stay out of the Baltic states. It was a clear statement to Putin to not move on Poland and Romania. And, all those countries are vulnerable at this juncture with the assumed. And what that statement assumes is that Russia consumes Ukraine.
Right.
And so
this is about credible threat of force. What he just did right there is what any American president should do on exactly these circumstances. So I'm going to praise Biden on that. I thought that was a very important moment because NATO it's not just merely, we need to stand with NATO solidarity, everyone hold hands. This is the credible threat of force where if America's not there in Europe throughout the Cold War, Soviet Union just takes the whole thing. Or if we don't fight World War II, Nazi Germany just takes the whole thing. And so, there are spheres of influence. Obviously, there are limits to American power. And so the story of the Cold War was a series of escalations and then eventually de-escalation. And I see that we're again on the escalation trajectory, but just, people are worried and you have to worry about it but there's also not much you can do about it, except the president can, of course, by having the credible threat of force saying, don't you dare go into NATO countries because that's going to go nuclear. That will mean the end of the world. So don't do that.
Well, he didn't say it was going to go nuclear. He did say
he said our collective response. What does that imply?
And that can mean a lot of things. But what he did say, what Putin, once again, strategic ambiguity, Putin doesn't know that. And so given that, Putin has been given a pretty harsh warning that there's lines not to cross. Let me compare this to something that happened in the Obama administration when Obama went and put a red line in the sand in Syria. And Hillary Clinton famously was talking about enforcing a no-fly zone in Syria, and which directly pitted U.S. airmen against Soviet airmen or Russian airmen in Syria, where we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff testify before Congress that was an escalation that could lead to World War III. It was the kind of
stupid policy. Only Hillary Clinton would come up with that one.
The cavalier use of red lines in the sand in Syria that Obama set up, that Hillary campaigned on wanting to enforce in 2016, that Hillary said was proof that because Donald Trump was against doing that, Hillary said it was proof that he was somehow a Russian agent. The fact is that was irresponsible policy.
She deserved that Daisy ad, by the way.
You are not going to find me say this very often, but Biden was 100% right by making it very clear that we're going to keep our treaty responsibilities. And he said that not just for Putin's ears, because he said that for Xi's ears as well, because we have same treaty responsibility with Taiwan. And that's
actually Carter withdrew from that treaty in the late 70s.
Well, we still have the treaty responsibility with Taiwan because we keep saying we do. Whether Carter,
that's the false hope.
Here's what we have in Taiwan. We have the Japanese who are pledged to defend. We got the Australians who are pledged to defend. We will not be able to stand on the sidelines under those circumstances.
Yeah, India will come in, Australia will come in, Japan will come in, and we'll be there. We'll be right there.
We have a carrier group in the South China Sea right now. So let's just be clear. If China decides they're going to try to take Taiwan, there will be full massive engagement. And Xi needs to understand that. He needs to hear it clearly, because it will not be Ukraine. Although Xi's trying to put it in the same terms as Putin did and justify the taking of Taiwan, it will not be the same, and he will and it will be a bloody, bloody, bloody decision by Xi if he attempts to take Taiwan. And so so ultimately, I think there's a lot of intent there. I will see. Hopefully, she will hear that, and it will dissuade
Is
him.
Biden saying that though? You're
Well,
saying
I
it,
think,
but you're not the president. It's the president.
well, I
saying
think he is saying that. I think he definitely is saying that. And if Xi's not hearing that, then Biden needs to say it again. He needs to say it very specifically as relates to Taiwan.
But
if he goes off,
I don't know. The last time he was in this situation with Ukraine, and he told the world exactly what he was going to do, that country had a very much shorter lease on life after that. So maybe it would be better off if he didn't say anything. If he doesn't have anything,
if he's not going to do anything,
don't say anything at all.
Robert, if he's not going to do anything, then he should keep his mouth shut. But it's playing a pretty dangerous game, having a carrier unit in the Sea of China at this particular moment, when the Chinese will have to assume that carrier unit is going to engage, and in fact, and as a result, would be highly likely to engage in attacks on that carrier unit as a preemptive move against Taiwan to take enemies off the map. So let's just be real. We're projecting power into the Sea of China right now with an intent to dissuade China. You do not project power unless you have a willingness to use it. And if you are projecting power with no willingness to use it, you are putting our sailors and airmen on those ships in grave danger without allowing them to pull the trigger to fight.
I point to Ukraine. We had troops there. We had troops there just a month ago in Ukraine doing all the training and delivering the equipment and all of that. And so I think that, we've been playing with fire in Ukraine. We're probably, I don't want to say we're playing with fire because it's not a game in the South China Sea. The millions of people's lives are at stake. I just hope that, the president needs to maintain the credible threat of force. I think we outlined where he basically ceded Ukraine in that speech last night, and he ceded it before the invasion even took place.
He ceded it before the invasion. He invited Putin to go into Ukraine for all intents and purposes. And so the deterrence of potential force being used against Putin was gone from beforehand.
Yeah, and how many dominoes fall now? How many countries will fall because of that lack of ambiguity? And would it have happened anyways? We'll never know the counterfactual. And we're coming up on an hour, Rick, so do you want to get the last word here?
Yeah, what we do know is that there is the United States has made it clear that what's happening in Asia is more in our interest than what's happening in Europe. The Europeans have the capacity to engage in any kind of European war that would occur, and that's through NATO and the like. We have a problem. We've built our armed forces. We used to have to be prepared for a 2-front war. We're prepared for a 1.5 front war now, and that means you have to put priorities into place. And everything we're hearing out of the Joint Chiefs and others is that our priority is Asia. And that's the war that we're most concerned about. That's the one we've been preparing for. And quite honestly, that's the one that we don't know. We don't know what the Chinese have in terms of armaments and the effectiveness of their armaments. And as a result, there's a lot of unknowns there. So it is so we have to be strong. We have to be forthright. We have to tell the Chinese exactly that there is going to be, that there will be forceful retribution should they attack Taiwan. And that used to be U.S. policy on both sides of the aisle, by the way. But we have to be willing to tell the Chinese that and enforce it. And that is one of the theories behind trading with China was that there would be an economic mutually assured destruction by having our supply chains and everything so tied to China. And that may still be true.
I think that
China's economy.
That's what that points to. Same thing with the potential Russian oil embargo. At what point do you push Russia so far away where Putin feels like he's isolated? I look at Zelensky calling for a no-fly zone over his country, knowing it would mean war between the U.S. and Russia. And so maybe he'd get to live for another week. And then what would that mean for the rest of the world? He's once his personal safety or the safety of his country is in danger. Look at what presidents do. Presidents have an incentive.
His job is to protect his country. His job is to protect his country.
Right. Every
That's
president's
his job.
is to
I have
protect their
I have
countries.
no problems with him saying, if you really want to save us, have a no-fly zone. I also have no problems with the American president saying, looking at it and saying, that's not in America's interest, and we're not going to do it. So that's
what do you do with the nuclear power, the aggressor, in this circumstance when they've already started invasions? What if they do go into the Baltic states? Is that just the end of the world?
Well, you assume everything goes nuclear. Everything doesn't necessarily go nuclear.
So we won't. So Biden won't protect NATO?
He doesn't have to go nuclear to protect NATO. Okay. So that is the assumption that you have to use nuclear weapons under those circumstances is a false one. But the main thing that happens is Russia at that juncture ends up, everything that you can throw at Russia gets thrown. But you don't have to go nuclear in that instance, because once you go nuclear, it's a point of no return.
It's irreversible.
And I don't think Biden has the fortitude to go nuclear. And quite honestly, I don't think he should under those circumstances. But I do think that any attempt by Russia to take any of the states that Biden mentioned, which are the next dominoes after Ukraine, the amount of force that it would be met with would be significant. And given the fact that Russia has 80% of their their land army right now engaged in Ukraine to take Ukraine, they have a really hard time then mobilizing all that northward to take the Baltic states. So understand, Russia is fully and totally militarily committed to taking Ukraine.
I've seen some analyses that suggest that a wider scale European war is not on the menu. You would know that by the size of the forces. And even the Ukrainians were questioning the size of the force to, quote, mount a full-scale invasion. Clearly, it was enough to mount a targeted invasion, though. And I guess we'll see how it plays out.
The 40 miles of tanks constitute 80% of their tanks, okay? So they have deployed in Ukraine with the intention of taking Ukraine.
They're taking the capital and those eastern provinces, but everything in between is kind of wide open. I think they're looking at a 10-year guerrilla war, civil war. If they do,
there's no doubt they're looking at a massive guerrilla war for a long period of time. You'll have a lot of attrition, and at some point, Putin is going to, the people of Russia don't feel as though they were under threat by Ukraine, and as Russian soldiers aren't coming back from Ukraine, from their deployment, Putin's going to have a domestic problem. So there's lots of things that are going on. There's lots of world challenges. I just think that ultimately, as a last word, we have a responsibility to not tell whether or not we're going to engage in military or otherwise. We certainly have a responsibility not to give open doors to countries. Say, if you invade here, we won't care, but if you invade here, we will. That's a stupid policy. I think Biden was right to reassure NATO. He reassured Poland. He reassured Romania. He reassured the Baltic states, and he reassured Germany, and he reassured France, and Great Britain. So that's a great thing that. In that regard.
Peace through strength. I think that is the way.
But you can't. But the fact is, it's really hard to do peace through strength when your track record is one of somebody who cuts and runs when things get tough. And that's the track record that was shown in Afghanistan. And ultimately, all of this is a direct fallout of Biden's failure in Afghanistan